Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter. And today we're going to talk about a little bit of football recruiting in the 2022 class. But before we get too far into this episode, this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. As we blitz into 2021, JFQ Lending wants the Wolfpacker.com members to take advantage of historically low mortgage rates. JFQ Lending has a Better Business Bureau A rating with over 2,000 reviews. They work with top lenders and do the hard work of finding the best deal for you. If you're curious whether refinancing your mortgage is a good decision, visit jfqlending.com today. That's jfqlending.com. And for our listeners at home, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always listen to us on thewolfpacker.com, where you should use promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. We're going to talk a good amount about football recruiting today, but if you want the real premium information, you want the gritty details, what's going on behind the scenes, use that promo code PACK60 to unlock all of that information and reporting by us. And we just went and visited a lot of recruits this Saturday over at East Chapel Hill High with Tom Lemming's event. And another friendly reminder, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can always watch us on YouTube, but please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. So Matt, let's jump right into it. I think a good place to start, I already mentioned the Tom Lemming event, we'll get to that, but let's start with the first NC State commit of the 2022 class, Rylan Van. He's a center from Cary High. That name probably sounds familiar to a lot of folks because his older brother, Davin Van, was a recruit last year, 4-star defensive tackle, big addition to the 2020 class. And now Rylan will be following him, joining him at NC State in the 2022 class. I talked to his head coach. You went and saw him out in person at Cary High. So, Matt, just curious to get your thoughts on Rylan and, if this is kind of a opening up for what's to come here in the next few months, because I know it's been a little bit of a late start to get that first commit, but I don't think that's abnormal to NC State. It's kind of just an interesting cycle in the recruiting scene because of the impacts that COVID had in 2020 and, prospecting, making decisions, doing visits, everything has just been a little bit behind. So your thoughts on him as a prospect and maybe what his commitment, could show in the months to come.
Yeah, I like Rylan. He's a pure center. He does snap in high school, which is a big deal. I think sometimes people think, snapping is not that hard. You can turn anybody into a center, and that's just not the case. It's actually very complicated. It's very tricky. It requires a certain skill set. And not just the snapping aspect of it, although snapping is extremely important, and shotgun snapping is not as easy as it looks. It's the ability to read a defense, identify a defense, make the calls on the line, and to go from snap to blocking in a split second versus just straight up blocking the whole time. So it's not as easy as people think it is. And in Rylan's case, it's something that he had been doing. You always prefer your center to have experience snapping. It's certainly not a prerequisite. I mean, Garrett Bradbury obviously never took a snap in high school. He turned out to be the best in college football, one of the best in NC State history, but it helps. And so he has that. He has the mentality that you look for. He's a tough kid. He's a physical kid. He's got that what seems to be trademark Van intensity. Davin was. I remember when I watched Davin play a game way back. It seemed forever ago now, but in 2019, he was headbutting a teammate without his helmet on, where his teammate still did have a helmet on. Where that in the game I saw Cary play against Hillside, Rylan got into a little bit of a scuffle with the Hillside defensive tackle. So he definitely has that physicality, that intensity. He's a standout wrestler, which I'm a big fan of for offensive linemen. Just look at Joe Skolthorpe, who may or may not hear his name called in the NFL draft, but the fact is he's good enough to be in consideration this weekend. He was a great wrestler in high school. Ike Aquanu, who will hear his name called in the draft at some point in his career, was a great wrestler in high school. Ryland came this close to being a state title winner in wrestling. So I think there's a lot to like about Ryland. I think some people might nitpick the height. 6'1" would be the max of how tall he is. But at the center position, I don't know if that matters so much. Grant Gibson's not that tall. He's a pretty good center for NC State. So, his recruitment wasn't necessarily an explosive one. But you have to remember, colleges aren't going to waste time and energy and resources and effort on someone that they don't think that going to go anywhere but NC State. And I do wonder that feeling out there was we know Ryland's going to go to NC State, so why bother? Let's focus elsewhere.
Well, I mean, it's certainly not one that's going to break the internet when he committed, but at the same time, I think it's important to remember that when you start off building a class, you've got to start with the ones that you're supposed to get, and I think he would be at the top of the list in terms of the guys that NC State is quote-unquote supposed to get, just because of the family connection, the fact that he goes to high school, 10, 15 miles down the road from Carter Finley Stadium, and we've seen time and time again that, Dave Dorn is building a family-based type of program. He's very much into that family type of culture and atmosphere, and you've seen multiple times, siblings commit to NC State together, former teammates. So it makes sense. It wasn't particularly surprising. I think you and I both were kind of on the same page that we thought that he might end up being the first guy to go ahead and commit. That ended up being the case. So good for him, good for NC State to get somebody on the board for 2022. And let's talk a little bit about the rest of the in-state class. We got to talk to a good handful of guys in the 2022 class and even some guys in the 2023 class coming from North Carolina this past weekend at East Chapel Hill High. So, Matt, just kind of your thoughts. Give me the preview of kind of the main NC State targets that you talked to and kind of the vibes that you got. And then, I'll share mine. I talked to Isaiah Crowell, talked to a few other guys as well. Crowell probably the main NC State target of the guys that I spoke with. But I know you were there a little bit earlier. Some of the NC State guys got there a little bit earlier. So I'll let you have the floor and kind of preview to our listeners who you talked to and the vibes that you were getting from them.
Yeah, I talked to quite a few guys. I'm trying to remember. I just put up a story on Dakota Twitty, who got a Final Four, and he went over that Final Four pretty extensively with me with NC State, Georgia Tech, Virginia, and Yale. So he's a receiver from Thomas Jefferson Academy in Mooresboro, North Carolina. So, he's the guy who could be coming soon. He says he's going to announce May 26th if all goes according to plan. May 26th. I'm looking at the calendar. If all goes right after Memorial Day. I think, for NC State, I think the guys that might stand out the most is Michael Allen. He's a 4-star running back from Rose High School in Greenville, North Carolina. Verifiable athleticism, verifiable speed, verifiable vertical, all of that. Got some Naheem Hines-like athleticism and build. That's kind of an ideal comparison if you're looking at the size and the athleticism. And I'll be shocked if he leaves the state of North Carolina for football. So if you're a subscriber, every week I put out a top 25 list that kind of ranks in order my feelings of where NC State stands with them, and it even had the projection where I think if they pick today, where they would pick. And Michael Allen is higher, is in the top 10 of that list. I'll say that, and even got a slight bump up after I talked to him. So he'd probably be the main one I would watch right now from an in-state perspective. There's some others like linebacker Torrin Wright from A.L. Brown in Kannapolis. Another linebacker, Xavier Simmons from Northwest Guilford High School in Greensboro. I put up a story on him yesterday. I think he's another that could end up being a UNC NC State recruiting battle. I did talk to Jackson Vick, who NC State is recruiting as a corner from Southern Nass High School in Bayley, North Carolina. He's good friends with Justin Williams, his favorite football player on the NC State roster, Mr. Bam Knight. Went to high school together. They're good friends. So he's he's definitely the one to watch soon. He's got another teammate of his that was actually Bam Knight's cohort in the running back room at Southern Nass. They're playing ball at Wake Forest, so it might be an NC State Wake Forest type battle, but he's definitely a name to watch coming up. So those are just a handful of them. It's a difficult year to get a handle on these guys this year because of the scholarship situation. You don't know how many you're going to have to work with. You throw in the wrinkle of the transfer portal, with the NCAA just approved the one-time waiver officially, where it was already known it was going to be approved. So, colleges now are going to have to start holding back some of those scholarships just to make sure that they have some to provide in the transfer portal. So you're already not sure how many you're going to have. Now you've got to account for wanting to have, it's like a salary cap, right? You want to make sure you have room in the salary cap to spend on your draft picks at a bare minimum. You don't spend all your money in the salary cap, because then you don't have money to sign your draft picks. So you have to leave about $7 million. It's kind of a similar thought process with the transfer portal now. So it's been a very challenging year. In all my years covering it, it's been very challenging to get a good handle on plans and how all that will play out. But those are probably a few names to highlight. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out or a couple guys out, but there's probably a few that really stood out to me.
Well, there's a lot of guys, and of course you can go check out all the stories that we have. We got quotes, and we're working our way through all the interviews that we conducted, putting up stories on these guys and the latest updates on their recruitment, what their thoughts are of NC State, and you can always go check out those stories. They're all premium, so use that promo code PACK60 at thewolfpacker.com for a free 6-day trial and unlock your access to be able to see those stories. But, Matt, I thought you brought up a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up in the sense that this is a very unique situation on the recruiting trail, not just for NC State, but for teams across the country. And I'm just curious to explore a little bit of the big picture impacts that maybe COVID had in 2020 and what that's going to do for not just the 2022 class, but the classes beyond it. Pretty much everyone that was in school, either at college or high school level, during 2020, during the COVID year, is going to be impacted by this in one way or the other. And then also as it pertains to NC State, because I know there's not an exact number of a scholarship count. It's the same with basketball. We constantly get questions on, what's the 2022 class going to look like? What's the 2023 class going to look like? What's the size of it? We don't know what the exact scholarship situation is. For comparison, the 2021 class had 20 signees that NC State was able to get. So where do you think, at this point in time, Matt, what do you think is kind of the ballpark of what the 2022 class will end up size-wise? And it seems to me that there's a lot of guys out there that, may have had opportunities to play Power 5 ball or, even at the FBS level, that are not going to get those opportunities in this class just because of those scholarship limitations and the fact that rosters are going to be pretty stacked for the years to come because of the NCAA's decision to not count last year as a year of eligibility. So I guess let's just start with the NC State perspective, and then we can talk a little bit about the impacts of the class.
It's tough. After that, you mentioned they signed 20 prospects, but they also brought in 4 transfers that were not included. So that's really a recruiting class of 24. And if you look at NC State's scholarship situation, they're pretty much pressed up against the 85 limit. You're limited to 85 scholarships per year. This year you're allowed to go over, but the only ones that can count over are your quote-unquote super seniors. So in NC State's case, I think you're talking 5 guys: Mckay, Daniel Joseph, C.J.
Oh,
Riley, Tyrone Riley, and Dylan Palm, I think are your five that you're talking. So State could technically take 90. But the thing is, of all your seniors, since nobody moved up a year in eligibility, your only seniors are either your super seniors or in NC State's case, two transfers who will be seniors that count against the 85. And that's Cyrus Fagan, the defensive back from Florida State, and Chandler Zavala, the offensive lineman from Fairmount State. And if you hadn't seen it yet, go check out his latest workout video. It's pretty freaking impressive.
I don't think.
So,
Spoiler alert: he's lifting 225-pound dumbbells. I don't think I could lift one up. So
120 pounds. 120 pounds.
Oh, excuse me. I gave him 5 extra pounds.
Yeah. So, but yeah, pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Pretty
No,
impressive.
I was very impressed.
And to mention, he's not doing it on a bench. He's doing it on a medicine ball. He's balancing on a medicine ball. So
we need to get our publisher Stu to give his take on that workout. He could give us a real analytical approach since he's such a workout guru.
But in terms of NC, so when you start with the numbers, you look at first the number of seniors that count against the 85 that'll be departing for NC State. That's 2. That's 2 guys. So now look, there are a bunch of juniors on this team, and not all of them are going to be back, obviously. I mean, so we saw probably half of the seniors that could have come back did come back. I left out Chris Ingram. He's another, I guess you would call super senior, but he was going to come back anyway because he had a redshirt year available to him. So that'll open up some colleges. Some of those juniors will move on after this year. You have to account for the fact that guys like Peyton Wilson draft eligible, Ike Ekwonu will be draft eligible, Bam Knight will be draft eligible. So you got some guys that'll be good enough to probably get a look at it, at least. So,
Isaiah Moore will be draft eligible.
Isaiah Moore will be draft eligible. Excellent point.
And not to mention, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the transfer rule in terms of the having to sit out a year, that's a one-time type situation. So again, correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, but my understanding is that if a player didn't transfer this year, they could still use that one-time transfer waiver after next season if they wanted to, and not have to sit out a year of eligibility, which probably will ramp up the transfer market for the years to come.
That's going forward every year now. You get one-time transfer waiver from now on. And so that'll definitely account for some attrition because just simply you're going to have so many freshmen on this team because all the freshmen from last year are repeating their freshman year, and you're adding in, I think, 19 freshmen in this class because one of them was a sophomore that came in. So you're going to have about 50 freshmen almost on your roster. That's insane. Some of them are going to read the tea leaves and see that, where before you may have 3 or 4 freshman receivers, now you may have 7. Where the guy reading the tea leaves that he got 4 or 5 classmates that are already ahead of him in the same year, he's going to probably go ahead and try to find something else elsewhere. So, ballpark range, I've been figuring 15 might be and that might be a high end. But I've been figuring we're going to come out with a mock class, our first edition here pretty soon, and the number I've been working with is 15.
That's bigger than I thought. Actually,
yeah. That might, as I mentioned, that might be on the high end. Now let's remember, I think you can expect NC State to probably save at least 3 or 4 of those scholarships for the transfer portal.
Right.
So you may be looking at 10 high school guys signing this year.
So when you're looking at that projected 15 number, and again, that's just a ballpark for where we sit in April of 2021, but you can't just compare that directly to the 20-man class in 2021 because there was those 4 transfers as well. So really, the comparison would be to that 24 size of the class, which is still considerably smaller.
Yeah. And yeah, after now the caveat is if the NCAA comes back and says we're going to redo the whole seniors, quote unquote, super seniors don't count towards your 85 limit. Mm-hmm. Guys that are repeating senior years, who are going to play a fifth year, they don't count toward. But that's going to be complicated to figure out. I mean, it's going to be really a headache.
So they're gonna do that for the years to come too. So when these guys that are, I guess now sophomores or juniors, when they get to that fifth year, if they make it that far, they decide to go, do a fifth year as a super senior, they won't count at that point down the road towards that limit.
If the NCAA, they have not said that yet. I know that's what some coaches are hoping for.
Right.
And that would make life a little bit easier. And the concern is that for these 2022 guys, you feel terrible for them because, as you mentioned, if I'm a mid-major, I hope I have a lot of scholarships to give out right now. Because you can go bananas and get yourself some really quality players this year because the class of 2022 is the one that's going to be hit really hard by this crunch. And I go back to it was an unnecessary decision by the NCAA to do this. I thought a overreaction, much like the Big Ten, and I won't say the Pac-12 had some other dynamics at play, but the Big Ten and a lot of the mid-major conferences up there, like the MAC, that tried to follow the Big Ten's, overreacted in late July, early August to where things were. And I think the NCAA just kind of figured everybody was going to follow suit, so they were going to go ahead and proactively freeze the eligibility, and it didn't need to be frozen. I mean, a full season was had for most teams. In basketball, most teams got a pretty healthy chunk of season in. The tournament got in. The championship were held, even the NIT. It was an unnecessary decision to freeze the year of eligibility, and it's created – the unintended consequences have created really real problems that I think in hindsight outweigh the benefits, even if NC State came out of it pretty good with all these super seniors that decided to come back. It created a scholarship mess that I think was unnecessary. And I've heard other comments. I hadn't heard Dave Doran, but I do remember hearing Mac Brown and Chapel Hill saying it was, in hindsight, they should not have frozen the eligibility for a year, that was a mistake.
Well, I know Dave Doran has expressed his frustration in terms of just some of the lack of clarity on, because it's almost like the NCAA made this decision and then didn't do the legwork on, okay, how are we going to figure out the logistics down the road? They just made the decision and then we'll figure it out as we kind of go along. And I think that's where the frustration has been. Yeah,
there's no question, because it messes up the math quite considerably. And it hurts players in the class of 2022. That's why you get nationwide is you got a lot of teams that have to figure things out and be very, very selective about who they can take and so it makes it hard even knowing what's the real offer and what's not. We use the term committable offer, which means you may say you have an offer, but if you're going to call the coach and say, I'm committing it, the coach is going to take it. That's a committable offer or not. And so it just makes life very complicated.
And you have to think about the impacts, in the seasons to come with that, because there's going to be, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot of guys that, would have had offers from higher level programs that maybe won't this year because of the, cutbacks on the size of the rosters and the scholarship counts. So you're going to see some lower level programs pick up some better talent than maybe they would in the past. And also you're going to see I think you're going to see a more active transfer market down the road, because you're going to see guys that maybe were looked past, or maybe, would have ended up at a higher level school but end up going a JUCO route, or, something along those lines. They show out at whatever destination they go to as, freshman, sophomore, and then the big schools become interested because they have that body of work at the next level. They become transfers down the road. So it's a mess. It's interesting, a lot to keep track of. That's why it's very important for you to use that promo code PAC60 at thewolfpacker.com. We're going to keep you in the loop as it all unfolds. I know I teased earlier that I had a conversation with Isaiah Crowell at Tom Lemming's event this past weekend. I'm not going to give away the gritty details. You can use that promo code and check out the story yourself on thewolfpacker.com. But I will say he's obviously a top target for NC State, considering his older brother Micah committed to NC State in the previous class, a 4-star wide receiver himself. Crowell is a defensive back. I know NC State's been talking to him as a potential corner, maybe even a nickel at times. He went to the spring game, had a good experience there. He's got a good little list of Power 5 offers, and he's also got some interest from some other pretty big programs as well, so we will see. I think the thing with him is don't necessarily bank on him being an NC State guy. Could end up that way, but I don't think he wants to be perceived as it's an automatic type of situation, as you know, most of these guys want to have their own recruitment. They want to enjoy the process. I know he's going to take a visit to East Carolina later this summer, so go check out the details there. I still think there's a lot of positive things NC State fans can take away. Good kid, 5'11", 175, holds his frame well at that size. But anyways, another guy I want to talk about, you went to go see him at Cardinal Gibbons High School. Was it last week, Matt? Or was it 2 weeks ago? Okay. Jaleel Davis of Richmond County, he's in the 2021 class, but he was one of the few guys in that class that actually went ahead and participated in the spring football season. They ultimately lost to Cardinal Gibbons in the state playoffs, but you were able to see him firsthand. I cut up the recruiting video for a little write-up that we did. Again, another reason to use that promo code PACK60. Check out that story, and our recruiting video of Matt's visit there is up on our YouTube page as well. But your impressions of Jaleel Davis, you saw him, up close. How big did he look? Did he look like the type of frame of a guy that's going to work out at the next level? And, kind of what did you see in terms of his ability to handle the Cardinal Gibbons pass rush, which they've got a pretty good defense for the 4AA level?
Yeah, it's tricky. Offensive lineman is the hardest position to evaluate in high school football, but he definitely has the size. He definitely has the frame. He's got a huge wingspan. It's a very projectable frame, and, he will look like an ACC offensive tackle when he gets done with Thunder Burnett, the Antonio Burnett, who's NC State strength and conditioning coordinator. He would definitely look like one. The question is how well will he, pick up the ACC level defensive lineman? That's just hard to know until you get him on campus. It's very difficult to know that the answer to that question. So, he had a couple of pancake blocks that I think would have gotten him some syrup bottles from John Garrison, the offensive line coach at NC State. Richmond's a little short-handed because some of the better players, including their star quarterback, went ahead and enrolled in college. That really kind of, and then they missed a handful of games during the season as well. I think they only got 5 games in this year, which, to be honest, may be a blessing for Jaleel Davis. He less punishment on the body. And so, he might be more ready in the fall to come back and he's likely to redshirt, but you're kind of worried about that spring-fall double that some of these high school football players are doing in the state of North Carolina. He was the only senior still playing. Chase Hatley at Panther Creek and Mckay did play to begin the year, got banged up and shut it down. Jyon Reeves at East Forsyth was intending to play. I don't know why he has not, but he ended up not playing this spring season. So, Jaleel Davis was really the only one that got more than a couple of games in, and he only got 5 in. So it didn't take a lot of toll on their bodies. But you walked away saying, I get why NC State signed Jaleel Davis. Is he a sure thing 5-star offensive tackle? Not yet. But does he have potential? Does he have projection? Is there upside? Absolutely. And that makes you understand why NC State decided to take a chance on him.
Well, again, for our listeners at home, I'm sure you're getting tired of me saying it, but use that promo code PACK60. You can read more about all these recruits, what's going on in the 2022 class, the guys that we were able to see in the 2021 class up close this spring. I guess one more guy we should mention, MJ Morris, 4-star quarterback, took a visit to NC State. I know NC State's high on his list. He's got a long list of suitors. Matt, your thoughts on him? I know you wrote a story on him last week. I think he caught up with him as well. So what's your impression of MJ Morris? And, it seems that NC State's going to get a quarterback in this class. It just depends on who. So your thoughts on him, and I don't know if you've been able to watch some of his tape, but kind of what he brings to the table as a prospect as well.
Yeah, he's a big story to watch right now, and we did put up a story on Monday, and obviously there was a lot of hits on that story. So he's obviously a person of big interest for NC State. He is a 4-star quarterback. He is a rival 250, which means he's a top 250 player in the country. Yeah, he pretty much narrowed it down to 5 schools. But I think the one school that a lot of people thought might be a favorite was Florida State. And then Florida State already had a 4-star quarterback commit. They were planning on taking 2, and they just got a second. A.J. Davis, not A.J., A.J. Duffy, another 4-star who's playing down at IMG Academy in Florida. They don't have any more room for quarterback. So now NC State has just suddenly is competing against one less very significant challenger. And then if you're on the premium board, I broke down that another very serious challenger may also be on the verge of getting a potential other quarterback to take them out of the running. And so this suddenly is getting very, very, very interesting for NC State. And setting up potentially very interestingly well for NC State. He's a very athletic quarterback, strong arm, can run. I think he's the kind of quarterback Tim Beck would like to be bringing in to NC State. If you look at it, and Justin, you know this as well as anybody, you broke it down last summer. The ability of a quarterback to run and throw is important to Tim Beck. He doesn't really have necessarily that with Devin Leary, but Aaron McLaughlin, who he just brought in, can really run. He's very athletic. Ben Finley can run a little bit, so that might be changing. But this is a guy that's definitely worth following here over the next few weeks, and we'll be on it because he's taking a visit to the Nebraska spring game this weekend, and then that might be it. A decision could be coming pretty soon after that. So right now that's probably the number one recruit I think worth watching for NC State.
Yeah, further proof that Tim Beck likes guys at the quarterback position that can get it done through the air and on the ground. 2015, when he was the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, his quarterback room included Cardell Jones, J.T. Barrett, and a guy named Joe Burrow, who eventually transferred to LSU and became a national champion. But all those guys have the ability to run as well as pass, and some of those guys had a better ability to run than they did to pass. Not necessarily Joe Burrow, but and of course he developed Sam Ehlinger down there at Texas before he ended up at NC State. So, but good news for NC State fans, because it seems that quarterback pipeline is in good shape at the moment. You've got your guy. Go ahead.
I should add, there's another 4-star quarterback, Braden Davis. I forgot about him, from Delaware. He's announcing Friday evening, his decision. He's been to NC State 4 times, I believe, including in April. Earlier April for a visit. Maybe it was late March. Maybe it was March. I probably think the odds favor a little bit more for NC State in the Morris case, but we'll see what happens with Braden Davis. He got South Carolina, Stanford, Georgia Tech, West Virginia, Duke, and Cincinnati on his list. So we'll see how that one plays out, but he will be announcing his decision Friday night via Instagram. Do they call it the Gram now? What do they call it, Justin?
Man, you sound old. Calling it the Gram, you sound 100 years old, man. If you're gonna abbreviate it, it's Insta.
Okay, so they're doing it on the Insta.
No, not the Insta, just Insta.
He's doing it Insta live.
All right, we'll work on that, Matt. We'll work on that. But yeah, you can check him out on Instagram Live. I'm sure I'll be the one having to track that
Yep.
one since you don't have an Instagram account, and I'm not gonna let the listeners at home follow my Instagram account. That's a personal account. You can follow my Twitter account though at JustinHWill. That's where I keep it professional. Well, not that I don't keep it professional on my Instagram. I'm not hiding anything, but it's more like a Facebook account on Instagram. Some of these kids, it's like their second Twitter account. I'm like, I don't want a bunch of people looking at my pictures of friends and family, yada yada. But as I was getting to, the pipeline looks good in the quarterback room at NC State. That 2019 year was an anomaly. That was a year where they were trying to figure out a lot of things, and not one guy really worked out. They eventually got to Devin Leary, and he seems to be the guy now, and he put together a pretty strong body of work, although limited because of the season-ending injury in 2020. But he sure looked the part of a QB1 at the ACC level and a guy that could compete towards the top end of the conference. Matt, you look like you got something to say.
Yeah, I was going to say kudos to Matt Mckay. He won the starting job at Montana State. You mentioned 2019. That reminded me about Matt Mckay, and they announced yesterday that he was going to be the starting quarterback at Montana State. I know that people say, well, yeah, but actually Montana State returned their starting quarterback, so he had to unsheath the incumbent to take the starting job. So congrats to Matt. You're not going to find anybody in NC State that did not like Matt Mckay. So happy that he's found success at his new school.
And the third guy from 2019 that NC State fans became even more very familiar with in 2020, Bayley Hochman. He was, a lot of NC State fans had their qualms with him. He got a lot of flack on social media. The backup quarterback's always the most popular guy when he's on the bench, and he's the least popular guy when he's in the game. But, he really helped NC State get to that 8-4 record last season. Without him, there could have been some major question marks at the position. There's a lot of close games that NC State won last year. Without him, you don't know how that season ends up turning out. And he ends up transferring to Middle Tennessee State, where I'm sure he'll be a front runner for the starting gig if he hasn't been named the guy already. But, you got Ben Finley backing up Leary, and then you got Aaron McLaughlin right behind him. So 3 capable guys. It's Leary's job for now, but I know the coaching staff has been really pleased with how Ben Finley has developed over the past year, his understanding of Tim Beck's offense and the way he's performed this spring. So, to me it seems like a guy that was a true freshman last year that maybe wasn't ready to be thrown right into the scene as a backup could potentially be, a solid backup option if needed this year. And of course, it's good to see NC State competing for multiple 4-star guys at the position in the 2022 class. So the pipeline keeps growing. Maybe the QBU track record continues to grow. Obviously, Phillip Rivers retired this past offseason, so NC State fans have one less quarterback to root for on Sundays, but you never know what the future holds, and good to see the pipeline continues to grow. So I'd say we've covered pretty much everything in terms of the recruiting topics for NC State football for now, but I wanted to touch on a couple different things before we close out this program. I know since the last time we had a podcast recording, just you and I, Matt, there was the announcement that there assumedly will be fans in the stands this fall because of the social distancing and mass gathering mandate projected to be lifted now a month from now. June 1st is the projected date, according to Governor Roy Cooper for the state of North Carolina. And then there was also the announcement that there'll be $700,000 in improvements to Carter Finley Stadium, which includes some areas for some food trucks, which our managing editor Ryan Tice called a no-brainer. I know he's a big foodie, a beer guy, so and I am too. Hopefully we'll get to enjoy those on our way into Carter Finley Stadium, maybe not. But sounds like some cool stuff going on there, and then they're going to convert the bleachers in the north end zone to a little bit more premium seating, or they're just going to – I've sat in those bleachers before, Matt. I'm sure it's been a long time for you. You might have never sat in those bleachers because you've been covering this beat for so long, but I can remember when I was a student, the north end zone, that's where you end up with a student ticket if you're the last to enter the stadium. And man, if it's a noon game, that aluminum is just, it's just hot right there in that north end zone because the sun's just beating down right on you. So cool to see him improve that a little bit. You always wanted to be in the south end zone or section 7 or 8 as a student. But you had to get there early, which meant you had to leave the tailgates early. And, of course, anybody that's gone to NC State or is an NC State fan knows that sometimes tailgating is the best part of the event. So your thoughts on getting back to full stadiums this fall, Matt, and also the improvements at Carter Finley Stadium?
Yeah, I hope that we're able to get. My understanding is that the contingent on the math gathering, I think I heard yesterday, with 67%, 2/3 of the state had to be vaccinated. Adult population had to be vaccinated by that point. And I was just looking at the numbers, and percent that had at least one vaccinated dose was 48.7%. So still a little bit of work to get to that 2/3 magic number. Hopefully we can punch through in the month of May to get there. But I would assume that by August, they'll be high enough to get that mark and open it up. And that'll certainly be a great day. And it's for NC State, but also for sports fans, because the crowds are sorely missed. They're just sorely missed. So hopefully that'll hold. The enhancement aspect of it, I think, makes sense. Let's just be clear that this is not, there was a $3 million budget shortfall. So I think some people initial reaction is, where'd the money come from? This is $700,000 that came from a naming rights deal that they had with PNC for PNC Arena. And one of the stipulations with that money is that it has to be used for enhancement, either of the Coliseum or the surrounding areas. Obviously, Carter Finley Stadium is adjacent to PNC Arena, so that's where the $700,000 is coming from, and it has to be kind of ticketed for something like this. So,
and not to mention, it's probably going to bring in more revenue down the road. So,
you would think. My understanding, North End Zone will be kind of a tent area now. They'll put up tent with carpet and tables and et cetera, and maybe a more comfortable seating to watch the game. I think it's a pretty good view from the North End Zone on the bleachers. You can see the whole field, and you kind of get the all-22 end zone look that coaches love. But
there isn't a bad view in Carter Finley Stadium. There are better views, but there's not a bad view in my opinion.
Yeah, you get it in the corner, it's pretty tough, especially as a student. If I remember, you had to look over all those kids. I don't know.
Maybe if you're on the first row in section 7 or 8, maybe it's a little bit tougher because at field level it's a little bit harder to see. I like having a little bit more of a bird's eye view, but
yeah, me too.
I'd say that second level, 50-yard line, one of the first few rows, that'd probably be the best seat in Carter Finley Stadium, in my opinion. Unless you're in Vaughn Towers, in which case it's a luxurious experience.
I like if I were sitting too, I wouldn't mind being high up on the first section under the overhang. It's a pretty good spot too. But yeah, I just want to make that clear. That's where these enhancements are coming from. I believe they're going to have to take away some of the parking spaces to do that. So the food truck and barbecue, maybe beer garden, whatever you want to call it. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But like you said, it probably will pay for itself when you look at it. So, and it's money it's money that has to be spent that way. So it's a good deal, I think, for the Wolfpack Club and for NC State athletics. And hopefully 2022 will be the start of 2021 will be the start of complete normalcy in collegiate athletics.
Can't wait. Well, let's wrap up this podcast, but one last thing before we do that. Last but certainly not least, congrats to NC State head baseball coach Elliott Avent. He was named the manager of USA Baseball's Collegiate national team this summer, so that's going to mark his managerial debut. He was an assistant on the team in 2004 and 2015, but a nice honor for Coach Avent in his 25th season at NC State, all-time winningest head baseball coach in program history, one of the top 10 active head baseball coaches at the college level right now in terms of total wins. So a great accomplishment for him. And not to mention, NC State baseball is on a tear right now. As of today, April 29th, they've won 11 of their last 13 games, and that was after a 1-8 start in ACC play. So there was a point in the season where, you and I were having off the record, or not off the record, but off-air conversations about the main goal is getting to the ACC tournament. Well, this recent hot streak has not only gotten NC State in firm control of making it to the ACC tournament, but also getting itself back into the postseason. And you did a little bit of bracketology for baseball earlier this week, Matt, in which you predicted that NC State should be in the field if it were to be set today. And the 2 days after, D1Baseball.com and Baseball America both had NC State in their projected field of 64 after a weekend sweep of Virginia Tech, who was ranked number 15 before falling three consecutive games to NC State and Raleigh. So good to see NC State baseball ramping things up at the right time of the year. Matt, your thoughts on Avent getting the honor with the USA Baseball Collegiate National Team, and B, where NC State baseball stands. They've got 11 games left. Can they play their way to a higher seed potentially in the postseason, or is that getting a little bit greedy, Matt?
No, they can definitely play in the highest seed. I think getting greedy would be thinking that they might be a regional host. That might be a taller order. They would probably have to
win all of them.
Yeah, they probably have to sweep Wake and sweep one of Pittsburgh on the road and Florida State at home while winning 2 out of 3 of the others, and then maybe doing well in the ACC championship. But when they were 1-8 in the ACC, I think I told you first step is get back into the ACC tournament picture.
Yep.
And then second step is see can you start getting back into the NCAA, where they all but 2 teams make the ACC tournament. And they got a pretty sizable lead. It's not certainly clinched, and so they can't sit back and think they've made it. But I think if it was held today, they'd be a 9 seed out of the, which is actually probably the 1 seed you want to be. Just the way it breaks up, there are 4 pods of 3 teams, and the 9 seed goes with the 4, 5, and 9 all together. So you avoid the 1, 2, or 3 in that scenario. So it's not actually a bad seed to be. So I think if this weekend is huge, because if they can handle business against Wake Forest, who's really been struggling. I think they got the worst ACC record, but they're better than the ACC record indicates. It's been struggling this year. If you handle business there, that gives you the leeway you need in the last 2 series, which will be at Pittsburgh and against Florida State, which will be very challenging series. So this weekend is kind of huge. Give yourself some leeway, handle business. Did a good job handling business at Appalachian State. Don't drop any of these non-conference games on the way. And if you handle business this weekend, I think if you win one of the last 2 ACC series with Pitt or Florida State, you're in a pretty good situation going into the ACC championship to get an at-large bid, which would be a pretty good accomplishment for a heck of a coach, and that's a great honor for a heck of a coach as well.
And in your experience, Matt, how much does the performance in the ACC tournament or the conference tournaments weigh into seeding? How much can you really move up or move down based on your performance in the conference tournament?
I think you could move up. I don't know if you move down so much, but I think you could move up.
Okay.
I mean, if they were to win the ACC championship, they would certainly move up. But I don't necessarily think it's one of those things you could move down too much. So
maybe that's the route for hosting a regional. Kill it down the stretch and then win the ACC championship.
Yeah. East Carolina going to host a regional. They're pretty well set in that regard. They might even be a super regional host. And I think this year it's going to be more regional than ever in terms of how they do the regions. Mm-hmm. South Carolina going to host a regional. The tricky part for NC State you kind of look at where they might end up going, there could be two popular destination points. The tricky part for NC State is that they're going to announce, I believe, 20 candidates to host the 16 regionals before the ACC tournament probably starts. So, you know, as I think about it, it would be really hard to host a regional because I don't know if there's enough time between now and then for NC State to get into the mix as one of those 20 teams.
Right.
Well, right now, you realistically talk about a team that's probably one of the last 4 or 5 in the field.
Well, you just got to get there. You never know what's going to happen once you get there. So that'll wrap us up. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play. You can always watch us on YouTube as well. And while you're there, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. Remember to use that promo code PACK60. I reminded you several times throughout this podcast, but I'll give it one more time. Use promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on the Wolfpacker.com. Unlock all of that premium recruiting content we were talking about. We only got into a little bit during this podcast, but if you really want the gritty details, what's going on behind the scenes, use that promo code. That'll unlock that information for you, plus a lot of good other information and premium content as well. Follow us on social media. You can follow our main account at the Wolfpacker on Twitter. You can follow my main account or my personal account at Justin H. Will on Twitter. Give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. And for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.